Hey, Steve, can you hear me?
Hey, Brian, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me? I can hear you.
All
Doesn't
right,
seem like you can hear me.
that seems to work. That's not. Why aren't speakers working? Okay, there we go.
Hey, Steve, are you able to hear me?
I am. Yeah,
All right.
sorry. I moved everything over the weekend, so I'm just making sure everything's still working. How you doing, Brian?
I'm all right. It's Monday. I actually didn't work all weekend this weekend for the first time in a few, so that was nice at least. Just felt
That
like
is
a bit of
good.
a break.
I've been, oh, that's why. Okay. My partner's a nurse, so when we take her to work in the morning, on Mondays, Krispy Kreme offers free donuts for nurses.
Okay.
So we've been counting this from how many donuts we've delivered. And we missed the first 2 weeks, but we're already on week 4. So it's just like, wow.
Yep.
All right, let's see. Let me just get our note taking up here.
You know, I just got a pop-up that somebody joined the Teams meeting version of this.
Who? There was no
It
Teams.
just said guest joined. I noticed that because I knew it was a Zoom meeting, but I think
Oh, you know
Outlook
what?
is creating a Teams for everything right
Yes. Hold on. Let me jump on there too.
now. All right.
Ah, open your Teams. Oh, hold on. Let me switch over here. Calendar. Join now. Hey, Justin. Can you hear me? So can you go back to the Slack channel if you can hear me? Not Slack, the Zoom. Can you hear me okay? I can't hear you for some reason.
Yeah, Steve, I can hear you on the Zoom call, so I don't know if.
Oh, I've got it's okay. Hold on. Justin, please join the CNCF Notary. Zoom. All right, so it's Sajay there was there as well. It was just a little confusing. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
And let's see. Justin's there. Can you hear me, Justin?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get Sajay over here. He's still on here for some reason on Teams. I scheduled it with the Teams app, so it accidentally always adds a Teams invite. Thank you very much.
Well, gotta use Teams sometimes.
Sajay's talking, but I can't. And he's still there for some reason. Okay, well. All right. Okay, looks like he left that one. Good. So give him a second. And I was pulling up our meeting notes. And just waiting for Sasha to join there. Today is April 20th. Justin, have you had a chance to get that document you wanted to write up?
Yes, I did write it up. Let me put it in
Okay.
the chat.
Let me just put this in our meeting here. Where are chats in this app? Here we go. Oh, I see. You just put that there. Okay. Let me open.
I can put it out as well, but yeah.
And did I just hear a duck, Sajay? Saj Tony? Saj Tony. Okay. So, all right. So here's where, Omar said he's going to be about 10 minutes late.
Which
So,
is any minute now.
yeah, I guess it is.
Except he'll probably join Teams.
Shit. Let me actually, that's a good point. Let me remind him. Zoom, which is this link. Oops, that link there. Okay. So thanks for joining. Sajay, are you there? I see a Saj Tony. Can you hear us, Sajay? Oh, and Omar just joined.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And we got Brian here. So why don't we just do a real quick additive invite here, or introductions. Yeah, that one. Okay, Monday. Let's start cranking things up. All right. In the background over here. So everybody knows me, so I'll skip. Justin,
Right.
you're next.
Oh, Justin, go.
Yeah, so I'm at Docker. I work on Notary V1 and trying to make Notary V2 work.
This is Omar. I am AWS for ECR. ECR for AWS. There you go.
I'm Brian. I work for Microsoft. I'm with the group that does our internal code signing and key management.
And Saj Tony. Have you gone Italian? Is that what the Saj Tony is?
It's a typo on the Zoom thingy. I never bothered changing it. I'm sorry. I'm Sajay. I'm the engineering manager for ACR for Microsoft. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to get this meeting together. It might be too small of a group. I didn't mean to exclude your other folks at AWS, Omar, especially Cattell. I forget the guy's name. It was really engaged last week, but
Niaz.
thank you. He was awesome. So there's two things kind of going on. We've got great broad community engagement, but we're like in lots of different, I don't know if they say extremes, but lots of good ideas coming in, but we're struggling on actually getting stuff done. So I know that Omar was pushing for AWS side to get a solution done by this summer. We were trying to get something done by this summer. That was before COVID. We still need to get something done by summer. We have some internal teams that have been building on the Docker Content Trust model because it's something we have, and if we have it, that must be usable. So they were using it, and different teams were working on different pieces of it. So Brian, your team was working on the remote key management part?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we've been looking at is how to enable initializing a notary repo with keys that are fully offline from key creation all the way through, and then also signing targets with a service rather than having a key located on the file system.
That's what I was, okay. So there's that part of it, and there are some other parts that are working on some content signing for things like MCR and things into some other air gap cloud movement scenarios. So we've had these fractions. It's a big company. People are working on various pieces, and they're making great efforts in their area. These are the way I was referring to. We have these subject matter experts that are working in their space, but it's without a larger, like, we're moved the house, but we didn't really tell anybody yet because the house actually works, and we're trying to make the house work in this new location because the current house doesn't work in that location. My analogy doesn't work really well in this case. So we wanted to get that sketched out and let teams like Brian and Niaz and others that are working on solutions work on that solution and work on their part in a solution that we feel can work in the bigger picture. So because we also have some deadlines internally that we have to meet as well. So with that said, we want to see if we can start some quick iterations on some things with what we know today, with the full assumption it won't be the final solution, but it will be something that as we're iterating, we're learning. And it gives Brian's team a chance to actually make progress on his part. Probably for the most part won't change, but we'll learn. Like, I didn't even think about complete offline key management. I knew we wanted to deal with key management stores because Omar was pushing on this as well. But I hadn't really, or key management providers, I guess was the thought. So I just wanted to, by doing these iterations, and Sajay was kind of, maybe we call it an NV2, and we incubate it somewhere. We didn't want to go off and do it just in a Microsoft lockdown thing, because that defeats the purpose of what we've been trying to do on, cross cloud, as well as we didn't want to come later on going, hey, here we go, we figured it out, everybody pile on. And, of course, that doesn't really do well for humans. So we want to figure out how we can get something going quick in the open, but with a focused set of people, not excluding people per se, but focused invites on people that we know we can make quick progress. With the assumption is that we're gonna, take the learnings and we will, scramble it back up and refactor it. That was it. We were thinking about doing an NV2 client in, whether I'd like to do it under the Notary project. I don't know if that's too visible. We were thinking about doing it on Deus Labs. That seems a little weird. I don't have.
Yeah, I think it's fine to do it under Notary. We haven't. I think that's fine. I mean, I think that fits in with the kind of proposal I just wrote in the doc. So I don't know if you want to just read that, everyone.
Yeah, we want to just take a break. And so there is, if Sajay, did you, and Brian, did you see the link that Justin put in?
I never remember with Zoom chat whether you can see it after if you join after it was pasted in or not.
All right, well, I just pasted it again.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, this the Google Docs here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
We'll just take our 5-minute read. Okay. Oh, Sajay, you say you're not at your desktop, so that means you can't see the link if you click it?
Yeah, where was the link shared on the chat?
Yeah, in the chat
Yeah.
section. Do you need me to paste it again, or? So Justin, you wrote, I assume you've caught up. Brian and Omar, let me know
Yes.
when you.
Yeah, I mean, I read it, but I'm late coming into this, so I'm not sure I have full context. I think I got the gist of it, but it might be good to just talk through it.
Yeah, and I'll kick off just the part where I was pushing for just signatures to kind of set some context. So let me know when, Sajay, are you still reading?
It's not shared on. I mean, I'm not able to see the link though.
But so do you not, let me see if I paste it straight to you. Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay. I'll give Sajay a chance to catch up. I could probably summarize it pretty quick because I understand what he's shooting for here. Let me know when folks are ready.
I'm ready.
So I know Sajay's got the context of it. So let me kind of frame a little bit. So yeah, I was kind of just trying to take what was working in Docker Content Trust and fix relieve the problems where we couldn't move between repos or move between registries. That I felt was the biggest blocker, including air-gapped environments. I'm not opposed to what conceptually Tough is trying to do. The problem that I've got with Tough is the usability and the basic, in order to make it work, the complexity of what it does. That's the part that concerns me. If I think, I keep on using the passport or the, whatever you want to call it, yeah, just use passport. The passport situation, I go to leave the country, take what the hell's going on now out of the picture, but I can show my
Remember
passport.
when we used to leave the country?
Yeah, when we used to leave the country, we used to go to other places. I can show my passport and they would scan it and they'd look at it. And as long as it's valid, there's a trust. They didn't go and re-examine whether I should be issued a passport. There's a trust that that passport for me is valid. That's the fundamentals of what I was trying to do. Now,
Well, yeah, you see, so if you take your analogy, I think what you're saying here, though, is that you have one of these old-fashioned passports where they don't check your biometrics.
well, define that though, because I'm actually not trying to disagree with that. Like they scan it.
Because your model is roughly, they'll let you through the border if you're carrying a valid passport.
Right.
Without any checks on whether it's actually your passport or someone else's passport.
In other words, they're looking at my picture and making it like the passport is valid, but does somebody dressed up to look like me, or is it a
yes?
What's his
yes.
name? With the mask on, Mission Impossible.
Yes, but anyway, I think that we should. I think it helps if we basically build it in two layers. One is the set of primitives we need to build this type of thing in a registry. And this type of thing includes things like Tough, but it might also include other things.
Right.
So we know the kind of basically what these things look. We know we need a standardized signature format for registries, which we have a group of people who have got opinions on, and which we can turn into a prototype fairly quickly, I think. So that's what Derek and Vincent and Sam were looking at. We had to make some decisions because we had some options that Sam wrote down, but I think
I never write those. Oh, he wrote down the design thing, but we never wrote down what we were naming. Okay.
but yeah, but and then I think I think you need some standardized, like for TAF, you need a few document formats that are basically in the spirit of anything else that goes into OCI. And then I think we can build TAF just from those primitives. But you could also build other things. And I think that it would be useful to build that out as a prototype of what primitives you actually need to build this sort of stuff in a registry, and to show that we have everything we need to build it. And then what kind of implications there are for what you need to do. I think I was having some other thoughts about this as I was writing it down, but I think it would be useful to have a concrete demonstration of what you actually need and how it actually work for maybe something really simple. I mean, obviously something really simple like just having signatures you can check, because that's obviously that's the easiest thing you could build.
Mm-hmm.
And then TAF, which has got a bit more complexity, but fundamentally I don't think should require very much.
So I'm not, like I said, obviously I'm just one voice, but it's not that I'm against having it more secure, of course. The problem is, what does it take, and is it reasonable? Like, yes, my passport there should be something that maybe it's to your point, biometrics, like it does a fingerprint, it does a retinal scan or something, and then it correlates that gives the next level of confidence that's me. The problem is, do I have to have a retinal scanner everywhere I go? And that's the piece that I haven't been able to understand, how TUF can make things practical to be used at a real-time production deployed environment. And it's not that we shouldn't exclude them per se. The question is it a layered thing? So if you look at the root of the Notary project scenarios that we wrote, let me just pull it up here. And in the picture, what I wrote is, look, there's a signature. I'll put it here. Oh, I gotta switch over everyone. In fact, let me just share my screen and just try to put some structure to it. Share screen. Screen one.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So last week, Brian, I, and Shuey also, we kind of had a discussion. One of the points we were kind of like trying to reason with is, today there exists a notary endpoint which kind of implements all of TUF. Is it possible that we could offload the whole thing to the client as needed,
yeah, I mean,
for example?
Yes, that is effectively that's what we've largely been proposing, is there's no, and that's what my prototype doc here suggests as well. I mean, basically we've always had a constraint that we don't want to implement a notary specific service in the registry. We want it to be a generic part of the registry protocol.
Perfect. So that means things like timestamp keys and all that would be kind of offloaded to the client in some form, right? If we went around TUF.
Or a client. I mean, timestamps is yeah, you would have to have some kind of external service that would re-sign things. Whether it might be, yeah, but anyone could run that service. It doesn't have to be the registry operator. You could run your own. You'd run your own timestamping service. You'd have some generic re-signing service that re-signs every week or whatever. But external to the registry, not as built in.
Yes. So the other thing that I think we were also in line, I think it's a simultaneous kind of like description that we did, and it aligns very well with the doc as well, which is we want some kind of client that can expose the rudimentary capability of stuff that can push something and pull something and verify the signatures. That is the min bar from a client perspective. And I think, yeah, so as long as we're kind of aligned on the client kind of offloading all the implementation, there's not much like from a disagreement standpoint in any format that I see at this point.
Yeah, no, so those things, that's basically the kind of basic design to it. We got stuck in kind of detail of, which is why I think doing prototyping and building some stuff out would be very helpful at this point, because it's more, then we have concrete implementations.
So how do we move forward? Because so that we can.
One quick question, Steve.
Yeah, go for it, Omar.
In your doc, Justin, we talk about Steve proposing something and Justin wanting something a little more, I don't know, secure, or at least a little more trustworthy, for want of a better word. And Justin Kapos and Tough, I can interchange just in terms of thinking about an approach.
Oh, is that a question? If
Yes.
Justin is up?
Yes. Yeah.
Justin is the one that did a lot of the incubus of the tough stuff in NYU. And that's where
Right.
Santiago and Trishank have been working.
Right. Okay.
So look, if we can make tough usable and make it, you know, approachable for the average human, then awesome. It's the challenge has been it's the super secure thing that I don't know anybody knows how to wrestle this thing. And everybody comes away that I've seen it going, wow, this looks really secure, but I don't know how to use it. So I'm happy to help make it a more usable thing.
What I'm trying to get to is Tough is one implementation, like a provider model for doing signature as well as validation. If we have an extensibility similar to these are the entry points that we can discuss and what the signature provider as well as signature validator needs, then the discussion of Tough should probably be do these options or do these APIs suffice for Tough. If something comes along later, it shouldn't be a closed model where there is no option for extensibility. So the two aspects here, right? One is the usability of Notary itself as a client, or maybe as a library and a set of extensibility points. Second is, okay, how does Tough actually integrate with Notary V2 rather than clubbing both of them together? If you can kind of think along those lines, then the conversation for Tough can be in its own silo, and the conversation for the Notary experience and the client experience can be another thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is Justin's concern, or not Cormac, but Kapos, that if we go too far down Notary V2, we'd like block out Tough? Like that it'd be like you'd make some design choices or experience choices that just prevent Notary V2 from being compatible with Tough?
I don't know if he's been looking, because I had a couple of conversations with him offline, he's not necessarily looking for that's being compatible. I think he's just concerned about the security, and we don't implement something that isn't as secure. I think, you know, that's certainly a part. I also think that feels like he's got a better solution and it should just be Tough. So
I see.
In the conversation I've had him is the requirements that are written. He's been using this analogy that I've written it around ambulances with wheels, and that precludes the ability to have helicopters come and transport patients back and forth. And like the example that I've kind of been back is like, look, I don't know about ambulances. Here's the requirement. Sorry, helicopters. I know about ambulances. I know about wheels. If you can give us a better solution, I was kind of playing this contractor role. It's like, if you could come in and say, look, the contract's written this way, I can give you this solution. Don't worry about the wheels. Make sure the rotors are good or something. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But right now your helicopter doesn't fit this model yet, right? It doesn't fit down into the city streets or whatever the analogy you want to take it from. So I think the place that we can do this is, and what I'm hearing Sajay say, which is I think what Justin Cormac here is saying, the signature that we want to store could be a Tough signature. Is that kind
of? That's not quite. Tough is not just, I mean, Tough has signed things, but it has a set of signed metadata,
Okay.
which the client has to understand, but and they all have to be signed. But if we can just define those as things that you can put into a registry and make sense from the registry's point of view, that's fine, because you can put them into a registry. So we have
Right,
to
that's
define.
kind of what I've shown here is the SBOM is a lowercase o, meaning it's generic. And if that was a tough FSBOM thingy, whatever that means, then it's totally fine. And if Red Hat wants to come with their signature thing, then that also could be fine. And the registry doesn't care, just like we don't care whether they're Helm charts or OCI images, we just store stuff. The fact that they're signed things is all we're really trying to get to a solution of. Does that meet what you're kind of getting at,
Well,
Justin?
yeah, I mean, I think it's slightly more complicated than that, but I think we'll tease out what that involves by prototyping what tough looks like and what just plain signatures look like, and potentially what some other what some other options might be potentially as well, because there are some there are some things the client has to do to verify these things, which are not
I mean, the client becomes way more complex, right, with tough either way.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the client has to understand that it's got to go through the tough process, and it's got to. So yeah, the client is. There's a fair amount of complexity that's in the client. It's not just checking a signature.
But is it just a thing wrapped up in the client? It's like my car is really complex inside, but I don't worry about it. If I have a problem, I replace this module. All the complexity is dealt with. I just get it and turn the wheel and drive. Is the complexity in the code that's written, or is it a burden that's put on the person trying to run it, or the interactions it has to make?
I mean, so you're asking the question: is tough usable?
Well, I'm trying to say, is there something inherently about it? You know, if I said every time I presented my passport that I had to also have my blood retested and my parents' verification done at the same time, yeah, that becomes unusable. If it's a matter of, hey, there's a retinal scan thing that I really need to implement and bang, it works, then okay, that's a reasonable balance to approach.
I think the answer to that question is that it depends on it depends on a few things, I think. I mean, some of it I mean, I know what the things are that people find confusing with Notary V1 quite well.
What are those?
And some of them are related. I mean, some of them are related to tough, and some of them are not related to tough. I mean, like, for example, it's quite hard to inspect the state of the world with Notary V1, which is partly because the stuff's stored in a database, but you can't see what's happening. So it's very hard to understand. Another issue is just there's a lot of keys, and people don't necessarily know where they've left their keys, and a model where the keys are managed for you by a cloud provider, for example, would be way easier for people to work with than a model where they have to manage the keys themselves.
So the portability issue that Steve mentioned, Steve, you said like portability, Notary V1, we need a portability in V2. Is that a tough issue or a non-tough issue? I guess if you're dependent on tough or you're compliant with it, then every registry you're moving to and from would have to support that framework.
Well, I mean, it needs to support the minimum we need, but I don't think it's very much.
I see.
And I think, I mean, that's not really an issue. I think the main portability issue with Notary V1 was simply that it was in a separate side database that you couldn't pull and push stuff from at all.
Well, but that's a
And there were some other issues, like even if you could, it wouldn't actually work because it had some other things tied to the location. So that was a Notary issue, not a tough issue.
And those are relatively solvable things.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I think if we build this prototype, those bits should be obviously fixed. So, but then it comes down to the usability issues of actually, like what the, actually managing the keys, and those kinds of things.
So can we do this in a layered approach that, I mean, let me state what I must have an assumption around. At the end, Notary says, here is a signature, and if the signature has to be moved. Like there is a signature that is assigned with an artifact. And the thing is that it is re-verifiable at a point. Is that kind of the model?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, so I push, Ubuntu was your example. I push it to the registry and then I pull it from a node. It needs to, there is a signature assigned with the Ubuntu image, but what Tough does is it verifies the signature is more valid than me just showing a passport and the person not even looking up to see if it's me that matches it. As long as the Tough goes back and says, prove that you are this thing. But is there still a signature that goes with it? Because what
else? Yeah, signatures on everything, yeah.
Okay.
That's part of the proof.
Could we do this in a layered approach where we have some subject matter experts that are solving problems that I don't certainly want to deal with. I just wanted to plug it in. I mean, if I don't want to deal with it, I want the results. I don't understand the problem enough never mind. Doesn't matter what I was trying to say there. The point is that we have people like Brian and Ian and some others that want to plug in a key management thing. If we can, and we know we can sign things without it being tied to a namespace or a registry, just using the digest or whatever we decide is the right thing. Could we do this NV2 client thing to start? And the first thing it does is has a key management part that knows how to fetch and retrieve keys and how Brian says we should be doing it. And Niaz, sorry, I'm sticking an R in there and I shouldn't, and Niaz. And we work on the APIs to make sure that those signatures can be moved between registries. As we're laying that down, there's this other part that says, in the NV2 client as well, there's this Tough extension, I guess, for lack of a better word, that knows how to deeper validate that signature. Like, could we work on this in 2 layers as well?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, basically. So we do the basic, what does a signed document in a registry look like? And then we how do we push them, pull them like any other kind of document? Like what's the actual concrete format for signing, which we've currently got, I think, 3 suggestions. We need to pick one and decide which one we prefer and decide if that needs any actual registry changes if, say, prototype is in the registry.
Sorry, Justin, I was typing and I missed. I got it.
Yeah, so what does a signed document in the registry look like? Prototype this in a registry. So we can, in the open source registry, and then write a client that can validate the signature. Can push and pull signatures. And push helps to push first before you pull. Then build out a a more complex client, such as a tough client, built on top of that to show that you can build stuff on top of it as a primitive. Make sure you don't need anything else.
What does tough give you outside of what we think Notary V2 will already give us? What you laid out in your document is obviously one thing. That is, you can validate that what you signed is actually what you signed. Like there's some name and version and
yeah, so it gives you basically a set of
identity.
guarantees around that you haven't substituted older versions, that that it's not out of date. You haven't substituted versions. You haven't. There's some bits around combinations of versions that are less relevant for container images, but might be relevant for some other things. And it allows you to delegate part of your namespace to other people, so you can give one team the ability to push to sign one part of the registry namespace and another team another part of another part, and allows you to rotate keys.
So other than rotate keys, all the other stuff I didn't quite understand, because I mean, to some extent, there's a trust made, whether if I trust, AWS, let's stay at Omar here, is putting out one of the base images that I use in AWS, then I assume I can get that AWS signs those and AWS is trustworthy until they're not. If they give me an update, a security update, should I be able to accept that? And I think the question is whether if they stuck it into the same tag, then I know that, okay, they're updating their 1.1 image and I should just accept that. Now they should probably also have a 1.1.1 or whatever the build number is. But I think if I can trust them to go forward, then if they go backward for good or bad reason, then either that's expected or Omar got hacked and Google just got their, I don't know. Anyway, their keys are no longer valid because they're not trustworthy. Because that's the part that I'm trying to understand what this deeper validation thing does, because I'm afraid it actually precludes base image updates, stable tagging updates.
I mean, I think the concern is not, and sorry, I've been quiet because I'm trying to take it in. I'm sort of, coming in late to this and just trying to understand the state of everything. But the concern is not that, in your example, that AWS decides to present an old version that has been updated. The concern is that an attacker does that, and at the point that there's an old version that's vulnerable but was signed at the time, if on somebody's environment where they are pulling that registry, if that old version looks just as valid as the new updated one, not because of what AWS is presenting, but because of what has been slipstreamed in there somehow, then that is a concern.
Yeah.
So I get that. The question is that how this is so relevant to today. What is the risk reward with letting people go back to work, right? I mean, there's never a sum zero. So do I do deep analysis every time? And if I can, great, don't get me wrong, but at what expense? And because the assumption is at some point, AWS, I won't make AWS Omar's signature, AWS signature, is found to be bad. Now, it already got through somewhere. There was some damage that it might have done or somebody figured it out because they're doing deeper validation all the times. And at that point, that key is either revoked, and we need to have good key revocation scenarios, or.
But this is an example of that wasn't an example of a key needing to be validated. It's simply someone substituting one thing for another, which are both validly signed.
If the key wasn't compromised, like that isn't.
The key. This is a case where the key's not been compromised, but you just substitute one for another. That they're both signed by a good key, but you don't know which is which. And that there are other things you can do to deal with that particular attack that's not tough.
Before you switch to another example, though, are you saying that AWS had a content out that they did sign and it was good last week, and then there's a vulnerability found, so a patch was given, the old version, which was still signed by WS, it's still valid, was resubstituted.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a classic problem with like Debian package signatures. They're never invalidated, so they're always valid. So you never know if someone gives you a package that's 2 years old.
So is that partially solved with the conversation we never actually closed on, which are we signing a digest? Are we signing a tag name?
Well, you need there's various ways you can solve that particular problem. Let's not go into them right now. The point is that it's a problem that you might want to solve, and that just having signatures is not sufficient to solve.
That's fair. No, that now I finally get the concern.
That's why, but I think that's why Justin was kind of a bit frustrated about your specifications being too tightly bound to mechanisms.
Yeah, I talked with him on Friday about it. And
his
helicopter can be filled to meet the contract, and I'm
not
trying to exclude it. I'm just trying to keep the usability.
Yeah, but there's a point at which usability is great, but unfortunately you get no worthwhile guarantees at all. So the usability is kind of pointless. So it's a matter of finding the right point, which is what the specification exercise was kind of supposed to be around, but hasn't really entirely delivered on, because it's kind of a hard problem. But I think that if we do this bottom up prototyping, we'll get a better idea of what we can build. I think there are some other there's basically, I think it does, that there's a set of minimum set of requirements we actually need. I think that I think Justin's view more or less is that if you take any set of requirements, you'll end up with something looking like tough, and so
you might as well start from there. Yeah, that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah. Whether that's strictly true or not is somewhat less clear, because some of the constraints don't seem less clear for the kind of use cases we have. Containers, like cross dependencies, are not really an issue. So I think there's some sense in which that might not be entirely true, but I think that I'm definitely in favor of just starting to build this stuff so that we can see what we can do.
I will have a hard stop in 5 minutes because there was a 10 o'clock I have to hit. Today I'm going to sync up with Aaron and Niaz and Sam at some point inside AWS, and I think in general building something quickly to prototype it to see what we can get to or what we have based on what we've already written down seems very logical, right? Just so we can make some progress, I think, and maybe it'll help refine what we're thinking. The aspects there would be, are we staffed to do that, right? Who all can contribute, and throw up some source code and start slamming away at it. That would be the one thing. And then the second thing was, along the way, just make sure that we're not going too far away from whatever Tough could plop on top of it as a. It almost seems like Tough is more secure, or at least it's going to position itself as it can give you additional trust things if you applied that logic. We want to obviously make sure that that's there.
Yeah, and I think we should definitely. That's why I think we should build Tough out on top of the base layers to make sure that we can build that stuff and it makes sense, and that there's a there's a sensible design for it that works in a registry that we understand and agree about.
I think, for the lack of a better word, I think Tough is a notary provider for the base implementation of whatever. And if Windows chooses to do something like look at the content block to actually determine the signature, that can be another way to do it. But I think having a simple prototype that can push a signature, validate a signature, that basic scenario is kind of like something that we need to identify what the interfaces look like.
How do we do this in a way that we don't have this thrashing contention on commits so that we actually achieve this layered approach? Because I don't have disagreement with something being more secure. The question is that balance of usability. And I want to be careful that we don't complicate the basics of getting the signature problem moving around, which I don't think there's contention around. The contention is whether a signature is enough. And I'm not saying
Well, I think there's still some options on signatures that we need to resolve, but I don't think that'd be terribly difficult to resolve.
Justin, you mentioned that a couple times. Is that written up somewhere? You said there are 3 proposals. That's something that I could definitely, that's
there's
I'd be happy to look at that.
There's either a PR or it got merged in the repo. I'm not sure which Sam wrote.
Yeah, to be fair, Brian, the detail is more on how it gets persisted in the registry.
It's basically around, it's the usual problem of how do you sign JSON? Should the signatures be inline or external to the thing we're signing? Those standard kind of questions. I've got opinions. And then there's what does the registry API actually look like to retrieve them? Which depends. So if they're not part of the object, if they're part of the object, it's straightforward. You just get the object. So that's actually really simple. But then you have the dealing. Registries really expect everything to be JSON. So that requires valid JSON signatures of a JSON object, which is what Tough does using canonical JSON, which I really felt was a terrible idea. And then the other alternative is we extend the registry to have external signatures as a primitive in the registry, which was my preferred option, which I think Derek was quite happy with. But we need to just get those people together and make a decision on that.
Yeah, let me read over it. I think I've definitely got some catching up to do. I think, as I sort of said, I sort of came at this from a particular angle with the existing Notary and Tough model and how we can make that fit for some of our requirements within Microsoft. And then trying to expand that on into the Notary V2. I understand the problem about signatures moving across registries. We're not even actually signing right now individual artifacts. We're signing the state of a repository. And so I'll definitely read some of this stuff. I've got some ideas.
I'd be interested to know what your particular set of requirements are.
Yeah. At a high level, are you asking that now, or?
Well, no, it doesn't have to be now. No, but if you could, at some point, I'd be really interested.
Sure. I could, in the 2-sentence thing at a very high level, what we care about, at least my team's angle coming in at this, is we don't give developers private keys, and the private keys don't sit on anybody's dev box. We have a service that does our signing, and we need to be able to integrate with that. And we also have requirements about keys that Microsoft owns that have to be fully offline, generated offline in hardware. And so the ability to initialize a repository with keys that are never exposed to the internet is pretty fundamental to what we care about.
Right. Yeah, so, that seems entirely reasonable. And I think my feeling is that managing keys for people is actually going to massively improve usability.
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the problems that in practice with Notary V1 is that, well, partly because there were a very large number of keys, but generally, like, the people just lost their keys.
Right. And I think that's somewhere where my team's specific requirements might diverge a little bit from the larger groups, because absolutely the key management for us, we don't care that key management is hard because we have, internally to Microsoft, very specific rules about that. As long as it's well defined and we know what we can do, and there aren't these, required online operations that, you can't do it without being connected to the internet, then, then we're happy. But as a broader thing, absolutely, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but I mean that I think one of the ways in which we can make an overall more usable model is to provide a more useful set of key management services alongside it.
Yeah.
Whereas Notary V1 just told you to look after the keys yourself, right, and didn't have anything. Well, I mean, that's not quite true. It did have some, the timestamp keys were managed for you, for example, but overall you had to do a lot of key management. There wasn't anything to help you do it. Mm-hmm. And obviously there may be some people who want to build their own specific key management, I mean, like you, for example, but if we can provide a managed service that you can run to do the key management, or a set of interfaces that you need to provide for key management that makes it easy for people.
That was my assumption, is it's just, we need some interfaces that, like, we can never provide the level of detail of what they're going to have to do. But as long as we can provide an interface that they can do what they need to do, and I'm sure AWS and Google has the same thing with their binary authorization to some extent, is as long as we can agree on what the thing that gets persisted, then they can do it the way they need to. And we just say, hey, I don't know how you got that there, but we trust it and we accept it. And the clients know how to validate it as well. Because I don't know if, like, my understanding is what Brian's trying to do is not, has anything to do with tough or anything else. It's just saying whatever the key that you use to attach to this thing, they need to own the.
Yeah, I mean, for example, with Notary, like some of the timestamp keys could only be in the registry. There wasn't any way you could manage them yourself.
Right. So that's something
because it was assumed to some extent that would be too difficult. But there wasn't any way of actually providing any way of doing it yourself. Whereas if we start from the opposite way, that we're going to start with providing a dumb registry with everything happening externally, then it's actually obvious that you can provide all those services yourself.
And we should have some defaults, because I think there's probably like 4 companies around the world that'll probably need to do this deep, key management thing. The owners of distros, or, large, extremely large, complex software companies and security companies. And the 99.9% of the others are consuming the software from those companies, but also have to add their own keys. So we can't exclude them. So I'm assuming that we can do with an API and interface that they can plug in, but we just have a default one that we provide for the majority of other scenarios.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I do have another call that I need to jump to now, but let me read over some of the stuff that you shared there, and I can try to come up to speed. This was helpful for me in understanding a little bit better where everybody's at, so I'm just ramping up.
Cool. Thanks, Brian.
Steve, I don't think I can make the call later in half an hour.
Okay. What do you want to do as next steps? Do you have a couple of minutes to figure out some next steps here?
Yeah, I'm fairly sure this meeting that I've got scheduled now has been cancelled, so that's okay. Yes, I got it. Yes, so yes.
So do you understand my concern is, like, how do we do this without the first commit being a big tough commit? And
well, no, I think that's the thing. That's the point of doing this as separate things is that, like the tough can be in a separate, basically in a separate. The tough client can be in a separate repo.
Okay.
I mean, we should have effectively what we need is a registry fork once we've actually decided how signatures are stored in registries that implements that, assuming the registry needs to implement something, which I think it probably will.
Okay.
And then we should be able to make a really dumb client that just checks signature, just pushes and pulls signatures according to the the registry API that we've just defined. So that we can actually check, so it can you give it a key, it can sign something, push it, and put it back and check the signature, which is basically just, can we round trip a signature, which is basically the CI for the registry fork, effectively.
Okay.
And then,
sorry, let me go back. I wasn't typing. All right. So, sorry. Now that you've thought well about that, how would I type that? Tell me that again.
So first we fork the registry to add signature support.
Fork which registry?
Well, just the open source.
Oh, the OSS. Okay.
Distribution. Yeah, because that's
and which one? The Docker distribution?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to actually? Oh, okay. Sorry, that's the server part. So keep going.
Yeah. So we fork that. We make. We add. Assuming we need to add anything at all, but we probably do. We add whatever the signature thing we're adding is, and the async APIs, which is the thing that we just need to finalize. And then as effectively as a test for that, we write a dumb client that can sign, push, pull, check signature.
And Chris created the NV2 client for a repo for us.
Yeah. And then once we have a library that can do that bit of effectively sign a piece of content, then we can make a totally separate repo that basically implements TUF.
Using these interfaces, right?
Sorry?
Using these interfaces that we define.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And that will.
Is it a TUF extension?
Sorry. Well, it's a TUF client, basically. It's purely client side.
So is it like a fork of NV2? Like how does it relate to NV2?
No, it's very similar to how they layer containerd and things like that. There is a generic set of interfaces that will define, I need to get a signature, I need to validate the signature. The TUF client will implement these interfaces or some kind of layering on top of that, and they can use that to kind of.
I mean, basically, yeah, the TUF client will basically, it needs to push like 4 bits. To do a TUF signature, or even over one, you need to push 4 signed bits of metadata. So these are separate registry objects that need to be pushed, plus the thing you want to sign.
Yeah, and the opinion of how they would be discovered is up to the discovery mechanism is up to the client as well, right? Like where it can look for and things like that.
Well, it would have a well-known schema. I mean, yeah, yes, but I mean, what I was proposing to do was write a definition of what TUF looks like in a registry that is convertible to and from the canonical TUF spec.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Pointing out where the differences are, but it should be obvious how you convert from one to the other. We could write the initial TUF client as just a transform over between those and use an existing TUF client just to demonstrate that it was equivalent.
So the TUF client, what am I writing here? TUF client is
So yeah, let's specify that the TUF client takes a TUF repository and converts it to a registry version and then converts it back so it can round trip to and from standard TUF via a registry. But it's not exactly the same as standard TUF because some of the formats will need to be content addressed and some of them will need to be in different JSON formats so that the registry understands the links.
So help me a
I'm
little.
Sorry, folks, I need to drop off, but I'll catch up later with Steve.
Okay, thanks, Sajid.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
So just tactically, we have the NV2 client under Notary. Should I also ask Chris to fork Docker distribution into the Notary project as well?
Let's actually just agree that we need to actually make changes to it first. But we should get together, Derek and Vincent and Sam and me and anyone else who's interested,
Yes,
just to finalize, just to decide what we prefer on that.
Okay, here's my thought that I'm just thinking out loud. So the individual person here isn't the thing to focus on, but the trying to get a vision of what we're trying to do. So I'll be the proxy of trying to understand what we're doing. I feel like we're a little bit of this. I've got this house outlined, and I've got these contractors that I really like and trust, but they're saying, trust me, I want to go build this thing, but I don't know if the end result is what I'm hoping for. How do we outline, like we've said, we wanted to do the scenarios, which I get the details, a little too much detail in the scenarios. I'm going to try to find some time this week to generalize them. We were going to do a UX, which is what we hoped we would achieve, which is kind of like the final thing that got.
Yeah, but it's hard to do. I don't see how we can do a UX without knowing what you actually have to technically do.
I get the problem.
It's a bit of a chicken egg issue with the UX.
How do we know that this thing with the bunch of the contractors that are working in the same direction? That's the part that I'm a little nervous about. And they're not just going to run a pipe. Like I literally had a house where I had electrical wire drilled through a down drain pipe. And it wasn't until the drain got clogged that the water went up the pipe and leaked all over the place that we found out what happened. So how do we have the sketch, not even a blueprint, just a sketch of, and I'm fine if it's like we sketch something out on one of these calls like we're doing here, and then we go off for a week, and then everybody comes back and says, all right, here's what we learned, here's the next sketch. Like, oh, okay, but if you put that slightly over in this direction, then this other problem gets solved too. And it doesn't have to be calls. It could be, Slack conversations, could be anything. You follow what I'm getting at?
Yeah. I'm just not sure what the answer is immediately off the top of my head. I think that
like I could think of, for instance, we want to figure out this key management API thing. So we know what we need to do there. I'll write up something really simple for that. And then we'll look for Niaz and Brian to provide the details.
So my view is that if all the keys are totally managed for you, then, and the operations you need to do with them are managed, i.e. you just need to indicate intent, I want to sign this thing, then it'll be usable. Like if I literally all have to, like obviously somehow you have to authenticate me against the key management service, because that would be helpful because it's not going to be open to the public. But about assuming that you have a way of doing that, I almost fail to see how any solution wouldn't be usable. Right. Regardless of what it actually has to do under the hood, as long as, well, this is not quite true, but like, but if I can basically indicate, I've got a new thing, I want to add it to my my repo. This is what it is. I'm me, do it. Like that interface is going to be straightforward, even though it has to do 4 million things, so long as the protocol is actually robust to errors, i.e. it doesn't kind of end up in a half-signed state that is broken.
Or a man in the middle could attack some kind of way, yeah.
Well, maybe not even that, but if it's like it's robust to partial failure, i.e. I want some sort of signing desired state and it'll get there eventually or something. And I can debug or if I'm an expert, I can work out what state it's in. I mean, it's observable, it's I can see what's been signed in my registry, for example, and by who. We actually had a lot of problems with Notary V1 with DTR about knowing who had made the signatures, because they didn't really have a good tie between the person who had signed it and the key, and so it just gave you a key which you didn't know who it was, and it was like, who actually signed that? What happened? You know, so the observability. But if you've got those things, I think then like how complicated the protocol is doesn't necessarily matter.
Okay. All right. I can work with, like, I think between AWS and, Microsoft and the key management there, we should have a pretty good range. And I see some others here from, Stuart, are you the person from IBM Registry? Okay. Anyway, there's certainly some others, and that's why I want to do this under the Notary project, so the broad visibility. So I think we'll have enough there. Sorry, searching for the key for the mic button. Was that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So I think we've got that's the part is we've got some great SMEs in these different areas. So let's start to plug them in. Okay. I don't know how we not do this with something added to the distribution API. So,
well, okay, so technically, if you do inline JSON signatures, which is what Notary V1 does, you can do it. Inline JSON signatures are kind of horrible. And the problem is you can't add a signature or anything without changing the content, which is horrible as well. The content hash.
Right.
So
I mean, I don't care.
So it's kind of, you say you can do it if you basically put the signatures on the object when you create it, and that signs the whole object without the signature, but it's kind of horrible. And I think, but let's just have this call and go through the options. I think we've got the PR, and I think everyone understands what the options are. And I mean, my preference is that we add a separate signature endpoint where you can retrieve all the signatures on an item, because
like the level of detail you're at, all I'm hearing is like it's not really feasible to do without making a change.
Well, I mean, it's feasible.
Not practical, maybe not
feasible.
But
it's practical, but it's not a very nice design. It's it feels hacky. And yeah, you can't add more signatures afterwards without changing the object's hash. Which is a big disadvantage, I think.
So what's the reluctance to just have the fork there so it's in place?
Well, we just haven't made that decision. That's why we should just have a meeting and make that decision.
Okay.
I mean, the advantage is you don't have to change the registry at all. The registry software, you just have to change the format of everything to add support for signatures. But then you have to change the format of everything you want to have a signature on. Whereas if a signature is just an object that can point to a blob, and you have an object that an endpoint that retrieves signatures for any blob, then, or at least any blob under a particular registry,
under other things for like just getting the stuff moved from one registry to another, like.
No, as long as you can pull and push over the endpoint put and get over the endpoint that gives you signatures per blob. There's a question about whether the API should be. Well, I mean, can you
Can I what?
Can you bring up pool 6 a second? But I mean, I
Oh,
seem to.
Wait, am I sharing still? Oh, I stopped sharing, didn't I?
You stop sharing. We're looking at the beach.
It's nice, isn't it? Here we go. Oh, let me look at the file change. So other than this thing being stuck in the middle, how do we move this thing? Oh, there we go. All right, let's get that there. Where do you want to look?
Okay, so that's actually, I think that just scroll down a minute. Well, I think that yeah, Derek or Vincent had a version which suggested what the registry API might look like.
Yeah, and I happen to have Chris available, so I was just like, why don't we just get this thing set up was more my question. Even if we don't make a change, at least it's there for us. Unless you think there's some larger implication around using Docker distribution versus Quay or Harbor or anybody else's.
Well, most people use distribution, or the majority of people use distribution as their base. So
is there any reason why I shouldn't do this?
No.
Okay.
So it's just like, if we're not going to make any changes to it, it's a bit pointless, but we can just delete it again.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Okay. So you said you can't stay.
Can you try and find a time that all those people can meet up?
Yeah. So what's a good time for you? What hours are you working these days?
Well, my main problem is the overlap with West Coast hours tends to have a lot of calls in, but I can do
does anybody know good calendar scheduling services out there that aren't just voting apps?
No. Friday's good. I can do most times on Friday. The rest of this week. Is it
like 9 or 10?
Yeah, early is better if possible. I'm basically free all the time on Friday. No one's put any meetings in yet.
I'll tentatively say Friday, 9 or 10 a.m. and I'll ask others for their availability. Sajay actually just told me he just actually booked off on Friday. Is it possible to do Thursday?
I can't do Thursday. I'm doing some live streaming thing.
Wednesday?
Yeah, I can probably do Wednesday.
Okay. Same time, Wednesday, 9 or 10?
Yeah.
Okay. And who else did you want? We wanted Derek.
Derek, Sam, and Vincent, because they were working on the doc. And
okay. All right, let me go solicit others to see if they can make it. And you said you have to leave. You can't be here for the 10:30?
Yeah, I've got to run.
Okay. I need to turn some heat on because I'm freezing. And I need to do something.
You're on a desert island. It should be warm.
I know. It's like it really should be much. I keep on staring at that, feeling it should be warm, but I moved and the sun is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and I got to go flip on the heat in here. So I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll join.
Okay.
I think joined early. So thanks, folks. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. By all means, talk amongst yourselves, but I'll be back in a minute. I can figure out where my mic went. Hey folks, we're back, or I'm back. So I've added a separate section, by the way, so that we can have notes from the two different meetings for those on the hack call. So let me just put that here. Oops, to everyone. And we got Derek, great. Can folks hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Never know when the speaker decides to switch over to some Bluetooth thing, and just waiting for somebody's baby monitor to start popping into my room here. So agenda for today, I'll do a quick photo. So for those others, the two agenda items I've got so far was a scenario update and a prototype we'll talk about for that NV2 client. Anybody else have anything else? And Derek, Cormac was proxying you for the previous, and you'll see the notes below, but we'll talk about that. Anybody else have any agenda items? Okay. We might wind up making this a shorter call as a result, but we'll see where the conversation goes. And just looking who's here, and Omar was there for representing AWS NIAS as well, so we'll talk about that. Okay, so quick on scenario update. In fact, let me just move into the meeting notes. Steve, so I can't type and talk at the same time. It'll sound weird. So I did talk to Justin Kapos on Friday, and we were talking a little bit through, oh, great, Justin's here, around some of the scenarios, and it was a good conversation. We were basically kind of talking about, is the scenarios a little too detailed, and is it restricting some other options? For those who were on the call last week, we were kind of talking about this idea of it's written around ambulances and wheels to try to get medical people to medical sites. And there's this new helicopter approach that's coming. And the question is, can it be generalized a little bit more loosely so that it's not invalidating the ability to bring this helicopter approach in? So I will look for some time this week to try to pull some of the more details out of it. That said, for the sake of making some more progress, one of the things we also talked about is there's nothing that precludes a better solution from coming in. And if it says, hey, wheels isn't a thing, but we need to make sure rotor blades are valid, or that the more reliable transportation is the important thing. There's nothing hard and fast around the way it's written. Certainly a scenario, it's not an API where it has to meet an exact contract. It's here's like the minimal viable thing. That said, I will go back and try to tweak them, but I just wanted to make sure that we're not trying to exclude a better solution per se. It's just working with the knowledge we have. So let me, I'll put a note there. We need to do better at our note taking and talking at the same time. So that was the scenario update. Other than that, I didn't hear of, I haven't gotten any other feedback that we're missing something per se. It's more of the style of writing, and I totally get it. I'll go back and tweak it, and we'll see what we can do there. The next thing that we've been talking about, and this has come up in a couple of different calls and some separate conversations, is making some prototype experiments. There's been a couple of efforts. I know that AWS has been trying to get some stuff done for this summer, pre-COVID. Microsoft, we've also been getting some stuff done. There's, meaning other teams inside Microsoft. It's a big company. And there were some teams that were already building around the Docker Content Trust implementation that we've got on ACR, not realizing some of the limitations that DCT has. Because they were focused on things like key management, offline key management, for instance. So those are great things that we want to learn more about, in addition to this balance between the constant push and pull of usability and security, which is what I would call of this conversation we're having over signing versus content verification, which is what TUF provides. So what we wanted to do there was get a prototype going where we can iterate and learn, and give a sketch for people like that, possibly Niaz, and I'm not exactly sure what you do, Niaz, but it sounds like you're doing the key management part of it thing, so that whatever piece, whether it's Niaz in key management or somebody else in key management AWS, and Brian and Ian and Microsoft's PRSS, that they can work on a key management area and plug into this, while we're also figuring out what is the persistence of a signature in a registry and some of the other parts. So if you look at the notes lower, we put some notes in here on a call we just finished up earlier this morning, where we wanted to kind of go through this in multiple phases. And so basically, what does a signed document and registry look like? This is some stuff that Sam had been working on with some others, and he's got a PR that's, it's a PR for the sake of notes, not a PR in the sense that something would merge per se, but it's what we agreed is a point of conversation for how we would persist a signature in a registry. We'll prototype this on Docker distribution, as well as write a client that can push and pull signatures. So I'm just reading through the notes I've got here. And then we'll write a client that can validate signatures. And the idea is that we can build a more complex client like TUF that can validate not just the signature is valid, but the content that's behind that signature is also valid. It's written in two sections here. So the second section is like basically first we would have a fork of Docker distribution. And when I say fork, I want to be careful because Chris, and I don't remember Chris's last name. This is not a fork in something we would release. It is a fork so that we have a collaborative place to propose some changes that Derek and others have been talking about doing, that we can, as maintainers or whatever we want to call it of this experiment, can do, that we're not doing in somebody's personal accounts or trying to do something funky off a Docker distribution fork. So we'll have that in the Notary project, and the assumption there is that if it's something that we like, we'll make a change to the OCI distribution spec, and we would make the corresponding PR back to Docker distribution. So fork can be a bad and good term. There's also an NV2 client repo that's there. So we'd be able to push and pull. We'll figure out the right interfaces for this key management thing we were talking about. And then the TUF client can also figure out how to, and this is I'm going to repeat without really understanding the details, but basically a TUF repository can match to a registry version and then convert back and so forth. So that's the summary of what we just kind of did on the experiment. I'll also say when I'm very focused on the word experiment, I could have even put experiment, I guess, in the repo name, but the idea here is that we're doing this to learn. This is not something we plan to ship. This is something that we want to learn, and then we'll come back and continue to figure out what is it that we need to do to build in the larger scheme of things. questions?
I have one question. This is Aaron.
Yeah.
Good morning, Steve. You mentioned one thing that sometimes conflicts with my view of a signature, like the value of a signature. And frankly, I'll raise my point and maybe you tell me when is the right group or time to have the conversation. But you were just rolling off, some of the roles and responsibilities, and it sounded after a signature is validated that Tough 2 would like to validate that the contents are, the integrity of the contents are also accurate, I guess. That statement confuses me a bit. And again, you could tell me there's a better time to have that conversation.
It's a perfect time. And I see Justin here. So let me tease up what my understanding of it is, and then just to try to put some framing context, because I definitely can't speak to the details of it. And this has been the conversation we've been trying to figure out. The analogy that was made is they're using this passport analogy, right? I show up pre-COVID when we can actually travel. So let's just wipe that part out of the world here, because COVID has nothing to do with my passports are valid or not. I would go to the airport, I'd show my passport, they would scan my passport and find out whether it's still valid or not, right? The question that really comes up is, well, how does it know that I am the person that is behind that passport? The person looks at me, but how secure is that? So the idea is the concrete example was a piece of software that was valid a month ago that turns out to have some vulnerability in it. And the vulnerability is fixed. And that same entity that signed it, in the previous conversation, we're using AWS as an example because I was trying to use somebody else besides me, Microsoft, ships a new version of it. How do we make sure that the thing doesn't get downgraded? It's still signed by the same trusted entity, right? In this example was AWS. AWS is still valid. Their key is still valid. The content is still valid. The problem is that content should not be representing something newer than what it currently is. So there's a little bit of a interesting content validation scenario there. It's not that evil company, we'll pick on Radu, evil Radu came in and stuffed his content into and somehow got it underneath the AWS signature. The content was still AWS. It was valid at the time. It's just no longer considered valid for this other label or name because that new label or name says it's more secure. Did I do a decent job of that, Justin?
That is one of the value adds from Tough. Tough also does handle the keys got revoked and other stuff that happens in there. So
say that again, Justin.
Yeah. So what was described is one of the value adds. Like it is something that you get with Tough that you don't get if you just have signatures. But Tough also does handle all of the kind of like someone has broken in and stolen a key and revoked this and handled that, and it does all of that management and addresses that in a secure way, gives you secure ways to recover and so on. So I think like Steve's example is totally a fine example to have. It like kind of makes the case. And one thing that I'm not really clear about in the end is, because the process of doing the Tough verification will effectively give you, if we ignore the supply chain parts of it, if we just think about the last step, it gives you, I think, all the verification properties that you would likely want. So I would think what will probably end up happening is either Tough will be used probably along with something that does some verification of steps that happen before that, which could be something like in Toto or another project, or what would be possible also is to use whatever that pre-verification is, and then if the decision is made not to use Tough and just forego all the security protections that it gives, I don't really know that there's a great reason to do a whole bunch of checks and then do like the Tough checks also, because Tough will be sort of will I think for once again the things that are after the software has been built and dealing with things like timeliness and key revocation, I don't know that there will need to be a lot of duplication with another thing there. I think it'll be a choosing tough or choosing not tough kind of thing.
I think that helps clarify things, right? Is that if we're talking about developing a specification, right, it's flexible to meet the tough constituents. It's also flexible enough to meet kind of an autonomous signature generation and validation scheme. And again, outside guy looking in, but that's how I've kind of viewed this. But I think that's rational to say tough, customer pick your configuration, and that these two things, while they could complement one another, you likely pick one or the other.
I don't know. We'd have to see about that. That might be dangerous. I prefer not to give people ways to shoot themselves in the foot that are really obvious ways. We don't want to give anybody anything that's like that doesn't meet common usability or like has burden. It's like really difficult or burdensome for them to use. So ideally what we end up with, and hopefully we can get there, is something that's both easy enough to use, we think everyone should do it, and secure enough that we think it's sort of the right option. Hopefully we don't end up in a situation where you either have to pick the usable option or the secure option, which is, I think, would I think be a bit of a tragedy. But maybe as we look through this, maybe that's a situation we end up in too. But I hope we can find one that has a sweet spot for both.
Yeah, I kind of agree there. Tragedy, that tragedy sounds terrible, right? Usable or secure, it just doesn't pass the sniff test. But perhaps when you say things like, so again, outside guy looking in, if I'm looking at just developing a code signing solution broadly, I might take on some of the responsibility of key management, rotation, revocation, some of these things that are somewhat intrinsic or similar to the need for the code signing platform. And so that's why when these kinds of conversations come up, my mind's view of this becomes a bit more foggy, right? So that's where I'm just looking to add value, but make sure that we don't get in the way of perhaps, right, the fact that tough is in place, right? And so maybe we just I need to think about code signing in for containers in a smaller scope that doesn't include key management, or?
Well, are you talking about the key management part that I mentioned earlier?
Well, and most specifically in the way that Justin just laid it out. You said, that you can perform a revocation. Like, so tough also handles key rotation, right? And so I'm looking for
the thing that we're trying to figure out is sorry. The thing we're trying to figure out is the balance of usability and security, which is exactly what Justin talks about, and that has been the constant challenge. Is something that's too usable, but not secure enough. Great, everybody uses it, but it's not secure, right? It's the key hanging out on, anybody said teenagers, they know, what do the kids do? They hang the key underneath the rock or on the plant right outside the door, and all their friends can use it. Something that was, fingerprint reader was really good for a while, but it didn't really work, and that was super secure, but the kids just didn't lock the door because nobody could get their fingers to be read. We need to find that right balance, because if something is super secure but not usable, then nobody's going to use it, or they're just going to leave it unlocked. The key management aspect of it is that I'm hoping that the goal there is that, and I'll come back to the usability part, but the key management part is there's some certain 95 or 98% of people just want something out of the box that's good enough, and that's fine. There's 4 to 6 companies worldwide that have really strict requirements around key management, Microsoft being one. I assume AWS or any software company does. The idea is that it should just plug in, and that's the challenge that we want to make sure it does, because if it doesn't meet their requirements, then they can't use it and it's irrelevant. And it's the 4 to 6 companies or the software companies that we all use on a regular basis. So we of course need to account for them. We just need a solution on top of that. So I'm hoping it's a layered approach that most people don't even notice. The balance between usability and security is, that's the part that we want to iterate on this and find out more. There's some incompatibilities of the way the technology works that we just want to bridge and experiment with. But there's some underlying problems that are irrelevant whether we use Tough or something else that we need to solve. Where do signatures get stuffed in the registry? How do they move between registries, between repos and so forth? How does that correlate with the key management? If ultimately Tough can fit into that, great. Nobody is trying to exclude Tough for an alternative solution. We're trying to figure out, does that really match, and do we need that level of complexity in the standard? So that's the layered approach that we're proposing. Again, it's an iteration, it's an experiment, it's not even a spec at this point.
The layered approach makes sense to me. I think we encountered something similar when we were talking about naming, right? And I think one of the agreements we came to there was that the signature itself can have additional metadata, which could be used for additional validations. And it sounds like Tough would be heading down something along those lines where it's looking at additional signature metadata to make decisions rather than relying on sort of like, is this thing in, like, does this match the hash that it says it is, which is the basic primitive around signing. So I think this proposal makes sense. I think it's worth looking at whether that, how that Tough extensibility works and whether that's a viable option or not. And if not, what do we need to do to support that?
Yeah, Tough does support additional information, but there's part of this also that I'm a little hesitant about, which is part of what I kind of had this conversation with Steve about earlier, is usually when you want to design a security system, the way you do it is you start with the things the system has to accomplish. Mm-hmm. Like the scenarios it has to operate in, the security goals you have, and then after that, you choose the mechanisms that make sense. And I feel like some of this mechanism stuff is already kind of mixed in ahead of time into what it is we're trying to do. And so I'm trying to urge that before we say like, well, there's like, we thought in this working group, it'd be a great idea to have this thing attached here. Let's make sure that whatever our solution is has that happen. I think this is getting back to this helicopters and ambulances thing. I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong. I'm not saying that that requirement isn't a good requirement. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense for usability. I'm not saying it's not what we eventually will want to have. I'm just saying that, I think our goal here is to make the most secure, best thing we can and to have it meet the needs that we have so that we don't end up having to do a Notary 3.0 design a year from now, all saying, my God, what a mistake Notary 2.0 was.
Right.
So yeah, I just would urge that we don't like put a bunch of requirements in too early in the process. We still have other things that we haven't finished formulating.
And that's fair. Like I said, I will go back and try to tweak something because there's no intention of solution by any means in the scenarios. It was just a matter of putting enough sketch for people to get their head around. The piece that we talked about this morning is, and Cormac represented what you were talking about, and that's how I try to echo back that scenario of content that, what, like the question is a signature good enough? And the scenarios that I wrote up did speak to signatures were the assumption they were good enough because I thought that was where we were at. It sounds like we are looking to go one step further and say the signature is, that's why the older valid software is a perfect example of this, is the signature may not be good enough because the signature is still valid. It wasn't revoked. It's still valid for that thing. It's just not representing what it currently is today. So I will tweak it a bit to be less focused on the signature as the final bit that says it's good enough. And then because other than that, I didn't hear anything that was anything confined around it other than this is registry focused. We're not trying to solve the ability to have content stored outside of a registry and moved around. This is when content gets into a registry, it can move between registries in a secure way. That's the scope.
Right.
That's the scope.
Yeah. And just to add, like, 20 seconds on of our discussion before, it isn't that you don't do a signature because you want to do a signature, just for the fun of it. You're doing a signature because you want to get a certain property out. You want to know that this party says that this thing is authentic and it hasn't been tampered with. And so that's really the level at which I think we need to be thinking, rather than, oh, you need a certificate. You should be, I think we need to say, oh, we need to make sure that this party's assertion that this thing is valid can be carried through. And if that happens to be a signature, as it very likely will be, that's fine. But the sort of pre-assumption it's a signature is, I think, a problem.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I think this is one where we probably want to clarify what's a core requirement versus what's a extensibility requirement. This falls under sort of like similar to naming, where some people using signatures may care about names and some may not. Having one that's restrictive for everyone, I think, is definitely not an implementation we would want. But having a mechanism where people that care about naming can implement something would make sense, right? And I think a lot of the additional sort of like things around getting the right version, getting the right name, those fall into more of the extensibility sort of requirements that we have. And I don't have any disagreements in kind of capturing it and making sure we have mechanisms to address it that way.
I'm trying to capture notes here, so by all means, if I'm not capturing what you said, please edit it. Which, shit, now I forgot my thought was. First verification, which. Annotation is not a good word. I put it in quotes, so somebody has a better word there. I think what I try to capture there, Justin, is we had historically been using signatures to be the thing that was good enough. What we're saying is signatures, whether it's a signature or something else, there's some piece of string, if you will, of text or content that will represent this thing, and then there's a way to go re-verify that on the client. And that's the leveling that we want to try to experiment here, because we are a little concerned around the usability, and the helicopter is a good example, especially in New York. I can't really fly a helicopter and land it in the middle of Fifth Avenue. Park, maybe, because there's some space there. So do we have we need to figure out how do we have the right usability goals.
Yeah, and even just, you don't have to, I think if you're going and you're saying, well, there's some opaque string that gets moved around, even focusing on the thing you're moving might not be the right way to do it. It would be to focus on the property you want to have. Focus on, oh, we want to make sure that it wasn't tampered with, that the patient got from point X to point Y.
Well, this one is an actual requirement. If we want offline signature verification, then we can't have a direct communication channel. So it has to actually be a fixed piece of data.
Right. So you have to have in a way, without communication to the server, the way to verify that property. But and like, I don't know, I can't think of a way to do it without something like the signature thing that's being described here. But I'm just saying that stating it in this way gives the flexibility to go and have the ambulance example, or really makes it so that you can sort of think about and justify why you're making the decisions you are and what security properties you get. But I notice we're almost out of time here, and I kind of made this point about 8 times, so I should shut up and let other people talk.
No, it's fair. Look, at the end of the day, this is not like some strict contract where we know exactly what the answer is we want. We're just putting it out for bid. We have goals, what we believe. There's a bunch of, the reason we're doing this as a community, not just because we need to move this between registries, but because we want to tap into the expertise of so many people that can bring to this. I mean, Ian's, offline key management is something I hadn't even thought about yet. So we want to do this in a way that we are learning along the way, and we wind up with something with at least what we've been laid out in the abstract of what the scenarios are covering, and hopefully better. If it's less, we probably didn't meet the bar. So that's kind of where we're at. We are at Capit, and I forgot we're there. I'll follow up with a couple. So Sam and Derek, you guys had been working on this persistence conversation. We wanted to have a conversation on Wednesday or Thursday at 9 or 10 a.m. if that works for you guys. So if you could help in the notes just below it, you'll see Wednesday or Friday at 9. Sorry, Wednesday, Thursday, I think it was Wednesday or Friday. And I believe Sajay's not available on Friday. So if we can you guys do Wednesday at 9 or 10 a.m.?
Wednesday works better for me.
Okay.
Wednesday works better for me as well. 10 works better than 9.
So Sam, I'm going to put you Wednesday 10, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And others are welcome. You know, this is, there's no exclusion here. It's just there was a couple people who were focused specifically on how we wanted to, there's a question there of how do we do we need any changes to the distribution spec? And so I've asked Chris to create a fork off in the Notary project so that we can incubate there. And if there is, then we can bring that back. And then the other part was how do we do this on the client? So there's are there any other questions?
Steve, could you please post the meeting times in Slack after the meeting, please?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Absolutely. I assume it's going to be Wednesday at 10 a.m., but you're right. I will absolutely. It's a good point. I'll make sure that that I'm posting what we decide to do, and we'll keep the notes here. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you, folks, and I hope others are at least in their head enjoying some kind of pleasant beach, which is I wish was back there. We'll see you later.